what we're seeing is the frequency of certain things has increased substantially. So hostility and just negativity, directed harassment, directed towards the board or individual board members and the manager. I mean, the manager's there, kind of taking the brunt of most of it, because they're oftentimes the face, that's there. That's the managing agent for the association, and they're the people that deal with the owners the most.
HOA Insights is brought to you by 5 companies that care about board members: Association Insights and Marketplace, Association Reserves, Community Financials, HOA Invest, and Kevin Davis Insurance Services. You'll find links to their websites and social media in the show notes.
Welcome back to HOA Insights, Common Sense for Common Areas. I'm Robert Nordlund, and I'm here today for episode number 104 with a special guest that I heard at a recent conference. And I came up to him right after the program to see if he could share that same presentation with our podcast audience. That speaker, Ed Hoffman, is an expert in the practice of community association law, being one of the under 200 association attorneys in the country that have their College of Community Association Lawyers professional designation. He's a prolific author and well-received speaker, and certainly he captivated my attention during his presentation, and he practices law in the great state of Pennsylvania. I wanted to have Ed on the program to share what he's learned from working with boards over his years, and specifically how things have changed over the last few years. We want to give you, our podcast listeners, the understanding and insights you need so that you can create great communities. Last week's episode was number 103, and it was an interview with a fascinating board hero who's taken it upon himself to minimize his Southern California Association's exposure to wildfires. Those have been big in the news lately. And if you missed that episode or any other prior episode, take a moment after today's program to listen from our podcast website, www.hoainsights.org, or watch on our YouTube channel. But better yet, subscribe from any of the major podcast platforms so you don't miss any future episodes. And those of you watching on YouTube can see the HOA Insights mug that I have here. I've got one, of course, for me, having to do with reserve funding, which you can browse through from our HOAinsights.org website or the link in the show notes. You'll find we have some great free stuff there, like board member Zoom backgrounds, and some specialty items for sale like this mug. So go to the merch store, download a free Zoom background, take a moment, look around, find the mug that you like, and email me at podcast@reservestudy.com with your name, shipping address, mug choice, and mention episode 104 mug giveaway. And if you're the 10th person to email me, I'll ship that mug to you free of charge. Well, we enjoy hearing from you, responding to the issues you're facing at your association. So if you have a hot topic, a crazy story, or a question you'd like us to address, you can contact us at 805-203-3130 or email us at podcast@reservestudy.com. Well, this episode was prompted by Dave from Phoenix, who asked, in our upcoming election, candidate statements are almost what I can describe as unkind. We have 2 opposing factions here. It's not just the election. You can see it in less friendliness as people pass in the halls. Is this normal? So let's get right to it, Ed. Welcome to the program, and how would you respond to Dave?
Well, first I'd say hello, Dave. And next I'd say, well, thank you for having me on, Robert, before we really get started here. I appreciate being able to speak to you and your podcast watcher/listeners. Dave is absolutely correct, and there's been a kind of a shift or a sea change in how, at least in my opinion, with respect to civility in community associations, especially over the last 5 years. And I know you attended the law seminar presentation, and there I spoke and asked the ballroom full of people, how many people think COVID impacted the industry negatively, and even to today. And what I mean, I don't mean necessarily by sickness, but I mean just the shift in mindset that occurred as a result of COVID because people were locked down. And what we saw happen in associations was people that oftentimes you never heard from. They all of a sudden were active and were contacting management, contacting the board because they were there. They weren't going anywhere. They were stuck and they were complaining. I shouldn't even use the word complaining, bringing matters to the board / manager's attention where previously that person didn't because they had nothing else to do for many hours a day. They weren't commuting to work. They could have been working at home. Not everyone could actually work at home, right?
Yeah.
So you had a lot of situations all around the country where all of a sudden there were people that were there that weren't there before. And what I mean by the break in the break in psyche, more than anything else, I think that it shifted the mindset of people. They became more apt to be combative and aggressive when it relates to bringing things to the board's attention. So what I've seen more than I've ever seen in my career to date in the last 5-ish years since the pandemic is the number of recall elections to remove either a board member or multiple board members or the entirety of the board, where we would seldom see that. I mean, I've been doing this a while and you would see it pop up every few years. I was seeing multiple of them happening every year, sometimes in the same community, which is really, really wild, right?
So multiple warring factions within the same community?
You would like to think that that's not the case, but obviously sometimes the documents are drafted in a way that lead to that, right? Unless you change the document. So, but yeah, there's been a situation where since the pandemic, things have really shifted. It's impacted boards, it's impacted managers, and it's not, I don't think it's getting better. I think the civility is actually getting worse. One example would be a rise in director and officer liability claims across the board. You can speak to almost any specialist in the industry that we all know the same people who do this on a national level. And they'll tell you the same thing, that there's a massive change in the amount of D&O claims. And D&O used to be, if you remember back in the day, it used to be literally related to, the claims would be related to the board breached its fiduciary duty, meaning they shouldn't have spent the money. They made a decision that impacted the finances of the association. Now a lot of D&O claims are being brought, allege that the board breached its fiduciary duty, and then insert the allegation. So because they are not trimming the bushes the same for my neighbors as they are for me, or trash can violations, I don't believe that everyone else is getting fined for trash can violations, but I am. So now I'm suing the board of directors and the association. You know, in the background, we know that the association had 150 trash can violations to 150 people over the last couple of years. And it's not just the one owner, right? But the allegations have shifted, and the plaintiffs' lawyers that are representing them, if they're at the court level, are throwing everything into the wind because it's a fee shifting statute, right? So the Fair Housing Act's a fee shifting statute, and if they prevail on one allegation, they get all their attorney's fees. It's been very interesting from a litigation standpoint and from a general counsel standpoint, meaning seeing what's happening with the elections and just governance in general, and the difficulties that have occurred since pandemic.
Well, I've got a few follow-up questions. I'm imagining you've seen a real change in how your law practice has changed, the different types of things that you deal with on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that law practice has changed too much. We ultimately still do the same kind of work. But what we're seeing is the frequency of certain things has increased substantially. So D&O claims have obviously risen, like I previously stated. Also hostility and just negativity, directed harassment, directed towards the board or individual board members, even committee members, depending on what committee they are, and the manager. I mean, the manager's there kind of taking the brunt of of most of it because they're oftentimes the face, that's there. That's the managing agent for the association, and they're the people that deal with the owners the most.
Yep.
And I'm seeing good managers either leaving that location and asking to be reassigned if they were the larger management company, if it's feasible, or quitting that management company and going to another one, hoping that there's a better gig for them, right?
Greener pasture.
Yeah, or I've seen this now more over the last few years, leaving the management industry entirely, just leaving and going and doing something else. There are managers actually staying in the community association industry, but they're going with other vendors and picking up other positions with them because they're not getting the day-to-day abuse that they were facing at times as a manager.
That's interesting. We are getting some managers, nicely credentialed managers, reaching out to us saying, hey, I'm good with numbers. I like budgets. Seems like life might be nice preparing reserve studies. And now I'm understanding why that might be the case. They've been sitting on a fire.
And Robert, not all the time. I mean, not every time, yeah. But I'm seeing it. Some people just want a career shift, but I'm seeing. You're right though. But I'm seeing the fire is the problem more often than it used to be.
Yeah. Well, before we started recording, as we were just catching up on what's been going on lately, you also talked about how hard it is on the managers for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons you said the board not supporting the manager. What does that look like?
What I mean by that is if the manager comes to the board and the manager is so the manager has ultimately two bosses at an association, typically. The first is the board of directors, and the second is if it's a third-party management company, not a direct relationship where the management company or the association's employing the manager directly as an employee. They would also have a relationship. Their actual employer would be the management company.
Right. The boss of the management company or director of property managers.
Yeah, whoever it is. Yeah. So it would be like the office, the assistant to the regional director or something like that. So at the end of the day, whoever the manager goes and reports the trouble to, meaning I'm getting harassed, I'm getting abused, this person is scaring me. There's too much aggression going on by owners coming into the office. The board has to listen to that, and the board has to escalate that, right? And what I mean by that is the board has to shut down the owner who's coming in and doing that. And then if they work for a management company can't sit on its hands. And the management company should support its own employee, and the management company should take actual steps to help the manager. And I've seen, again, this is probably in the last year or two, managers getting reassigned more often than not to different properties. And it's not a fault of the management company. It's not a fault of the board. It's the fault of the people who are causing those problems. And at least the management company is willing to move them somewhere, right? But that doesn't solve the problem, because if someone else comes in, it's like a faucet keeps dripping unless you put a new washer in. Yeah. So if you don't fix the faucet, it's going to keep dripping. And that's what happens with this kind of thing. And the other side of the coin is board members leave. Good board members leave. Good committee members leave. These volunteer positions, by the way, they're not getting paid. Basically, they say, I don't have time for this. And it's a 4-letter word that begins with S. I'm not doing this for free for this type of abuse, right? Or this type of harassment. And I'm not sleeping at night. I've heard all of this from people. And that's, again, I think since the pandemic, I'm hearing more of this than I ever heard in my career.
Folks, you're hearing it here from an attorney who's on the front lines dealing with associations. And Ed, you've been doing this for decades?
Yeah. I started off, I kind of had the opposite upbringing, as they say in the industry, as most HOA lawyers. I shouldn't say most, but many of them were developer lawyers. They were real estate lawyers that represented developers and were drafting documents. And I had the opposite background. I was never really a traditional real estate lawyer. I was in the trenches getting hired to represent associations. Even I wasn't their general counsel. I was getting hired typically by insurance companies to come in and litigate cases and defend the associations in lawsuits. So I kind of have the reverse. And then moving forward, as I defended so many of them, as they say, for some odd reason, started to like me and hire me, and the rest is the rest is history. But one led to the other. It's always something, right?
I want to talk about fixing the problem, but I'm looking at the time. Let's take a quick break to hear from one of our generous sponsors, after which we'll be back with Ed to talk about more common sense for common areas and how we can address the actual problem.
Tired of low returns on your HOA reserves? With HOA Invest technology available nationwide through SEC-registered Capital CS Group and Keystone Private Wealth, you can now grow your community's funds with competitive, tax-efficient returns while keeping them safe and accessible. Our accounts are held with Charles Schwab, and HOA Invest's API integrated technology gives you daily access to balances, holdings, transactions, Schwab statements, and a nationwide inventory of CDs and treasuries, all in one easy-to-use platform. Ready to grow your reserves? Get personalized strategies and a free investment policy review with HOA Invest, your trusted partner for securing your community's financial future.
And we're back. Ed, right before the commercial break, we were talking about how there's a lot of problems out there that are potentially forcing board members out, committee members out, managers out, making life difficult for them. And that's going to continue unless you solve the problem, the underlying irritation. So how does a board begin to touch that irritation and, in Kevin Davis's words, lower the temperature in the room, make things a little simpler and easier there at the association so the tensions don't run so high?
So I guess the first thing we should bring up is that the reason why this is a problem and consistently is a problem is associations were not set up and still are not set up to deal with mental health issues, right? And mental health is driving the bus on a lot of what's happening these days with this type of behavior. So associations are meant to manage the property and manage the finances, right? That's literally their entire function. They're not social services agencies. They're not there to typically manage people, especially other owners. Adults, the premise is adults should be adults. So that's the starting point. And then where you go moving forward is, as far as lowering temperature, there's, in my opinion, at least what I've seen time and time again, and whether it's in court or outside the court, or just meeting with owners at an annual meeting or meeting one-on-one with owners and the board, is there's a clear lack of communication many times between the board and or management and the owner or owners. And what I mean by that is, I don't know how many times I've heard, I just wanted someone to listen to me,
to be heard, to feel like a person, to feel like someone cares.
Yeah, and there are two sides. Listen, there are two sides to every story, and a lot of those
not
people,
three.
Yeah, a lot of those people did have the opportunity to be heard. In fact, our statutes, most of the statutes in most jurisdictions, require an opportunity to be heard if there is a violation issue and you're going to find them. Some states, I'm also licensed in New Jersey, they have mandatory ADR provisions in there. Pennsylvania, we don't have mandatory, we have voluntary ADR in our statute that was put in however many years ago, but it's not mandatory. Some documents, and I say probably 5% of the communities I represent, have some sort of mandatory ADR provision in their documents. What I say is don't overthink this. If there's no ADR requirement, don't overthink it. And this is also assuming, by the way, that it's not a hostile, aggressive situation. Yes, if it's dangerous, call the police. Don't get in the same room with people. And this is not what I'm recommending. Doesn't deal with that. Nor do you ever want it to be in that situation.
Not your job.
But let's offer to meet with them. Let's offer to meet with them and try and hash this out. And a lot of times boards say, we don't want to meet with them because all they do is harass us. And I'm like, I get it, but maybe they'll stop harassing you if we're able to talk to them. It could be a pipe dream, but guess what? It's worked sometimes.
Let's talk about personality. Every board has a personality made up of a bunch of different people, different characters, and we've all seen the television dramas where there's good cop, bad cop, that kind of thing. is there perhaps a role on the board for someone to be the peacemaker? So if this a person in unit number 13, I always like to use unit number 13, if they don't like the board president, maybe you don't have unit number 13 owner meet with the board president. Maybe you have the member at large who's the smiling guy or the smiling lady, and they say, oh, yeah, sometimes he or she chooses the wrong words, and maybe that person, can that kind of defuse some of the issues?
Sure. If we already know that there's a personality conflict between a board member or multiple board members and the owner that's complaining, we're not going to try and sit them down with the owner. We're going to have different board members, and I usually want the manager in there as well, because they're the ones that are bearing most of it. And then I offer the board. I'll make myself available if you want me there. And most of them do, by the way.
Interesting.
Yeah, because even though I represent the association, I am the only one there without skin in the game with respect to being an owner, right? So I'm more of a neutral party that way. I'm not neutral when it comes to asserting the association's rights and remedies, but I'm trying to actually get some sort of conciliation to occur. That's my function at that meeting. And if it's feasible, great. If not, then guess what? We're back to where we already were.
And I don't know what your hourly rate is, but I'm thinking that if a board has a real problem with the person in unit number 13, it may be worth a couple hours of your time to sit down, and I'm not going to say arbitrate, but allow just the air to clear and make the problem go away. Is that maybe some of the best money they can spend?
Maybe, yeah, depending on the situation. And the other side of the coin is, and I'll spend 45 seconds on this, neighbor to neighbor disputes between owners, the fence line, and owners, when they hate each other.
Yeah.
And I've had really, really crazy things happen in that area. But the regulations under the Fair Housing Act have changed in a manner where if there's some sort of discrimination alleged, then the association likely has a duty to at least offer to step in and try and help resolve the dispute rather than just letting it go as alleged. I've had in the last 2 years, and I'm not kidding you when I say this, I've had 3 or 4 situations where both parties are accusing the other of discrimination. So it's like cross discrimination, and you don't even, and coming in cold, you don't know what's happening. You don't know who to believe. Yeah. A lot of boards don't want to deal with that because they say, well, if that's not our business, it's neighbor to neighbor disputes. And I say, right. But when it rises to the level of alleged discriminatory conduct, the Federal Fair Housing Act now places some responsibility on the association. In fact, I had a HUD person tell me on a conciliatory call once, your client is able to send the violations to people, because the guy said, I read your documents, and you could send violations to people for a trash can violation. At the same time, you're not willing to keep the peace there. And it even says in there, if things become a nuisance or annoyance for an owner in the document, the association shall XYZ. And, HUD understands it. So here's the other thing, though. That takes two to tango as well. Both owners would have to show up. And usually when we offer this, one says yes, the other one doesn't. And probably 60% of the time, maybe 70. The other 20% of the time to 30, both say no. And then 10% of the time they say yes.
So it is hard to get them in the same room to even talk it through.
There's a visceral hatred of by the owners, and that's never a good situation to have, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get back to what we can do for our audience here. You talked about communication, and I believe that nature abhors a vacuum. And so if there's absence of communication, people are going to make up their own narrative. And so you've got to try to get ahead of that. And maybe that's the standard things, the newsletter, the board meetings. Maybe it may be the board members intentionally check the mail twice a day just to get out and walking through the halls, smiling? Can you work those little things over and over and over again so that you're starting to bridge that gap between the board and homeowners and make the board members more human, make them more accessible, get some communication out in the open? Because who is it that said the only problem with, or the biggest problem with communication is thinking that it has happened? Something like that.
Yeah, and I get in an association realm. In Pennsylvania, by the way, we have no sunshine law, for lack of a better word, as it applies to association board meetings. So board meetings don't have to be open to members in Pennsylvania. We have to, generally, the requirement is under our Nonprofit Act and other things like bylaws, you have to have an annual meeting once a year. And some communities, that's the only time that the board is seen or heard from directly is at the annual meeting. We don't have a requirement, and this is the issue. If people are, a lot of the people that are not happy are alleging there's a lack of transparency.
Oh, they're operating in secret.
Yeah, right. There's a lack of transparency. However, the law doesn't require them to have open meetings. Sometimes I nudge the board, depending on how many people are saying it. Why don't you open up 25% of them 4 times a year? Open up if they're meeting monthly, and it's up to the board to decide how it wants to do that. I have boards that don't have a requirement, and they have every meeting is open, everyone.
I like that.
And I have other boards. In some communities, it's hard to get things done though when that happens, right? And I have other boards that decide 2 times a year or 3, but at least they're opening them up. And the transparency is something that triggers a lot of people, or lack thereof.
I was going to say lack thereof. Yeah. If you can, the more you can do to have it be our community and not the board versus the homeowners, I think that's going to go a long way to settling problems down, releasing tension.
And real quick story. I've had multiple communities where a person was the squeaky wheel, complaining. There's no transparency. The board's acting in secret. They're doing everything wrong. I think there's illegal things going on. They're stealing money, whatever it would be. That person then runs for the board. That person gets on the board. That person then gets on the board and starts working with the board and realizes none of that is true. And then I say to the board and to that person, wouldn't it have been nice if you were able to convey all of this in a way that everyone already knew that there was nothing nefarious or going on? If there was more transparency, then it's kind of like the light bulb goes off.
Yeah, no, I think that may be the gem of this program right there. Getting the information out, the board being transparent, saying, look, like a magician does. Look, I got nothing up my sleeves. We are just volunteers trying to run this place. The bills are going up, so we need the assessments to go up. I still remember, I'm dating myself. There was a Seinfeld episode where, do you remember Jerry's dad was down in a condo in Florida?
Yeah, Del Boca Vista.
Yeah, there we go. Got elected to the board, and Jerry bought him a Cadillac.
It was the Cadillac, yeah, right.
And the timing was just so unfortunate. Kind of last question. I want to try to bring this to a close. Here on the podcast, we talk about the 4 C's. The boards need to care, they need to be curious, they need to be courageous, and they need to communicate well. Does that capture it for you, or what kind of words do you use to characterize, this board over here, they're doing a great job because they are X?
I think all those attributes that you brought up are indicative of a well-functioning board, right? And whether it's those specific attributes or others, I think what makes boards successful in a general sense is due diligence, communication with the owners to tell them what's going on, and also foresight. Having foresight to understand what's coming up and how to communicate that with owners, what money might be spent. Big projects, you don't want to drop something on them that $1 million project is coming up just out of the blue. You want to start. If you knew
about it a year ago.
If you knew about it, not if a bridge collapses in your community from a tropical storm or something, which I've seen. So that's a different situation. But that being said, you never want to be in a situation where someone, especially a judge, is looking at the board and saying, what did you know and when did you know it? right? When you're dealing with spending other people's money.
Good records, good meeting minutes, all that kind of stuff, and having that available for people to review. Thank you, Ed. It's great talking with you. I'm so glad you're able to join us on the program here today. Any closing thoughts to add at this time?
No, I thank you for having me out. I would submit that, boards and this, I guess the closing thought, I do have one. Boards and managers shouldn't get discouraged over this. And I think what they need to understand is, they can't be called upon. You have a lot of perfectionists that serve on boards, can't be called upon to be perfect, but you should be doing your due diligence as a board member and fulfilling your duty. And board members should always understand that there's help around the corner, meaning professionals, the statutes and the documents always provide that part of the process is if it's a financial issue, call your CPA. If it's an engineering issue, call your engineer. If it's a reserve issue, call your RS. Get the reserve study done, call your attorney. Rely on the professionals to help you. Don't make all decisions. And you mentioned the vacuum. Don't make all decisions in the vacuum, because that's actually how you stay out of trouble.
I like that. Well, if you'd like to get in touch with Ed, you can visit his law firm's website at hoffmanhoalaw.com. That's HOFFMAN HOAlaw.com. And Ed, you said you practice in Pennsylvania and New Jersey?
I'm licensed in New Jersey. I just primarily practice in Pennsylvania, though.
Well, we hope you learned some HOA insights from our discussion today that helps you bring common sense to your common areas. You'd think I could get that right. Well, we look forward to having you join us for another great episode next week.
You've been listening to HOA Insights, common sense for common areas. If you like the show and want to support the work that we do, you can do so in a number of ways. The most important thing that you can do is engage in the conversation. Leave a question in the comment section on our YouTube videos. You can also email your questions or voice memos to podcast@reservestudy.com or leave us a voicemail at 805-203-3130. If you gain any insights from the show, please do us a huge favor by sharing the show with other board members that you know. You can also support us by supporting the brands that sponsor this program. Please remember that the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the hosts and guests, with the goal of providing general education about the community association industry. You'll want to consult licensed professionals before making any important decisions. Finally, this podcast was expertly mixed and mastered by Stokelight Video and Marketing. With Stokelight on your team, you'll reach more customers with marketing expertise that inspires action. See the show notes to connect with Stokelight.